Hi there, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for a webinar rather, event on the Common App. Some people are still coming in. We're going to get started momentarily. Just a few things as we dive in. Tonight's webinar is being recorded, and you are here for cracking the Common App. So we're going to be going through the Common App itself, discussing different tips and tricks to make it a little more manageable, some do's and don'ts, and certainly touching on the essay as well. So you'll get the recording of this after tonight's event. You'll also get an email with me with any further information and resources that we discussed tonight. And certainly we welcome questions today. The Q&A is open, the chat is not, and you can enter in questions as we go throughout, but you can also ask them at the end. So as I mentioned, we're going to get started in just 1 minute. I'm letting a couple more people in, and then we'll dive into tonight's presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, wonderful. Now we can get started with cracking the Common App. For those of you who have joined us before, you may know me as Bernadette Smith, and you've been to some of our webinars in the past. For those of you that are brand new, I'm Bernadette Smith from Nova Star Prep, and I am the Education Programs Director here at Nova Star. If you're unfamiliar with us, as you've seen on the screen since we got started tonight, these are the services that we provide and the resources we offer to students. And one of our resources we offer are free webinars like tonight's on cracking the Common App. Just to give you guys a little insight into who I am, if you haven't met me yet, I am Bernadette, as I mentioned, Education Programs Director here, and I'm a licensed high school guidance counselor. So some of you may have had appointments with me in the past to review SAT results or ACT results, or we've chatted about college planning, but I have been a high school counselor for over a decade, and I've been a college coach for about 15 years. I've also been a writing coach, a college instructor, and an academic coach overall, and I have some specialty with students with disabilities applying to college also. So I've worked in a public high school, a very large, high-achieving high school up here in Massachusetts, and then also at a smaller private high school also in Massachusetts, but I'm extremely familiar with the Virginia area, with Nova in particular, and schools in the Mid-Atlantic. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the Common App, and that's a big topic. Obviously, if you're the parent or if you are a student who is a current senior right now, if you're a junior looking ahead or your parent is looking ahead, these are very important things. But if you're in 9th grade, this is also helpful to start looking ahead so that you are prepared for all the things that the Common App is going to ask you and all the different activities you might want to get involved in, everything from picking the right courses ahead of time and making sure you have the right essay ready to go when it's time to hit submit. So we're going to cover all of that. So this is appropriate for parents of all high school students. And even if your kids are a little bit younger, this will be helpful, but I promise you they will change something in the next year or two. So it's always good to stay up to date on it. So as you can see here, we will cover the essays, activities, and more. And as I mentioned, I certainly welcome your questions. First and foremost, we do have just our agenda for tonight, which is covering why the Common App matters and some of the overview of the application itself. They recently redesigned the platform, so there's a lot to see there, but very similar information from the past. We're also going to discuss the essays, the personal statement, and any of the supplemental prompts you might find. Activities and recommendations, common pitfalls to avoid, and some timelines and strategies for the next steps. So you're here because you know the Common App matters, right? Either you're filling it out with your student right now or you're looking ahead to future years for the next admission cycle. And basically, the Common App is important because it's used by 1,100 colleges and universities. When I first started as a counselor, I think they were at about 700. And so obviously it's grown quite a bit. It might have even been 400, but I don't want to date myself too much here. But certainly it's widely used. More of the schools on your college list are going to be on the Common App than not. Of course, there are still schools out there that are not on it. University of California system has their own system for processing applications. Obviously, some studying abroad and seeking admissions in different countries comes with different qualifications. But for the most part, you're going to find a lot of your college admissions journey will land on the Common App. This is certainly where individuals are going to present their first impression to admissions reps. So those would be your readers at different universities. Some schools have 2 readers per application, some have different processes, but this is where they're going to see your essays, the breadth of your activities, the depth of them as well, and your GPA and other, demographic information, choices about major, choices about living on campus. But certainly this is a way for the schools to see you beyond just your grades. Certainly the grades are included there, and obviously they're going to receive your transcript, but this is a chance for them to learn a little bit more about you, especially since we live in an admissions world where interviews aren't as commonplace as they used to be. These are some typical things that you're going to see colleges looking for on the Common App. So part of that is academic performance, naturally. So we just mentioned that. This would be GPA, of course, and then also course rigor. Are you taking challenging classes over time? So that can be IB classes, AP classes, honors level courses, showing progression over the course of your transcript. Because as much as you're sending your formal transcript in, you're also going to be inputting your senior year classes and making note of, whether or not you're taking APs this year, you're taking college prep level courses, and a lot of different things like that, so they can see what you're facing this year, because they won't have your grades yet from a senior year, of course. Certainly they're looking at the essays and different personal statements, and this is where we want your child's voice to be the strongest. And we'll get to very specific tips about the Common App essay itself, but really this is about hearing your child's voice, being really authentic, and not feeling like you're writing the most academic paper of your life. It's more feeling oriented, a particular experience, and showing some creativity as well. Activities and leaderships, it would be a huge component of the Common App, especially in terms of picking and choosing the activities from your child's lifetime of involvement to present themselves in the best light. Of course, our students, I think my children included, have a lot of activities today, and they have different ones than what we used to put on the Common App and what we used to put on college applications. So there's a lot to take into consideration as you develop the activities section, and a lot to do when you consider the limitations they give you in terms of character count there. We'll touch on letters of recommendation as well, and some insights into what that means, and when you should be selecting those and who you should be submitting. And then also there's an element called additional information, where this can provide some context in certain situations. Most importantly, this is a chance for a student to stand out. This takes them beyond the GPA that's presented to the school, and beyond if your school reports class rank, and beyond the SAT or ACT score. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, they did change the dashboard a little bit this year on the Common App. So your student will have their own application on the Common App that they have to connect with their school, either through Naviance or other platforms. And that's where we're going to have the connection to the recommenders, and making sure that everything's getting sent by the college counselor or the guidance counselor as well. So these are the main components of the Common App themselves. So profile speaks for itself. Family section, education, testing for self-reporting, activities section, and writing. So as we go through, I'm going to share what those sections include, and then what you should have prepared for that. And then we're going to get into more of the nitty-gritty of, the best practices and do's and don'ts. So personal information is exactly what it sounds like. This is where all the demographic information is going to come in. So the student's address, their contact details, their parental contact details, their language preferences, geography and nationality, if you have a Common App fee waiver. Obviously, this is very important in terms of also if you're applying for in-state tuition. So we want to make sure everything's correct on your address, and then they're going to ask you later about how long you've been a resident of the state. If some students qualify for a Common App fee waiver based on being on free or reduced lunch at their school, this is something definitely to ask your school counselor about. The family section, this is information about the parents, the household size, and siblings. And we'll touch on that here in terms of, what else you need to know for that section. Of course, for demographic information, you need your name, social security number, and date of birth. And then this is going to also be where parents definitely have to help out with the application, because you need to share the parents' info, including level of education, to the point where we're also going to look up the school itself that you attended or several schools you attended. That would be sibling info as well that we're going to find in this section. So same thing, if it's an older sibling who's attending college right now, you're going to enter that. If it's a much older sibling who already graduated, you're going to enter that. You're also going to enter if they're a younger sibling in 7th grade. So all of that is taken into consideration in the Common App. And then some household info, if there's for the marital status, if parents are together, if they're divorced, if they're separated, if there's varying situations, they account for quite a few of them there. And then also noting dependents, whether or not the student themselves has a dependent or if there are other dependents in the family. So when you get to the family section of the Common App, this is where parents really need to sit down with their students to ensure that they are filling in all of the appropriate information. And when I used to sit with students in my office and do this, this is when we were calling mom and dad to be like, what year did you graduate from Georgia Tech? And what program did you do? So they're going to need that information for you. And so I just saw a question about this. Why does the app ask for education info on family members? Part of that is data tracking on their end. They try to, across the country, they try to keep track of how many students attend college, and if both of their parents attended or not, if one of them attended, if none of them attended, if they attended vocational school, you'll see that's an option on there if you attended school for a little bit. And they give you a huge drop down of options there. And then for siblings, they want to know that because they take that into consideration in terms of if you're applying to a school where the student already is in attendance, the older sibling, and it factors into when we're looking at financial aid later on. So those are some of the reasons. Certainly there's going to be some where they're looking at whether or not you're a legacy student in certain scenarios. Some schools have dumped legacy status recently. So that's one of the reasons you're going to see that there. But also they're really trying to track the trends associated with parental level of education and student admission to college. And like I said, they're going to look for marital status and things like that. How do you report if parents attended college abroad? There is a college search button that does include some colleges abroad on the application, but not all of them. There will be a chance to put other. All right. So then we have the other sections here where you're going to fill in current education. So that's the student's high school. There's information to fill in there. The current or most recent year classes. That's where you're going to enter in senior year classes. If you're applying very early and it's like in August, obviously you're going to still report that they're occurring. So I know some things might change. They'll see it in the transcript. And this is also where students are going to note their future plans, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But this is if your student has attended a college while in high school, like they might have some credit from a dual enrollment course. You're going to see that there's a spot to put that here as well. Grades will also be entered there. This is self-reporting. They're also going to receive the transcript. Testing would be for SAT and ACT, and activities is the one we're going to spend a good amount of time on in terms of how to best approach that section. So there is a school code for every student, but there's also a lookup for it. So you don't need to know it by heart, but if you have it handy, I guess it saves you about 13 seconds, but you can easily look up your student's school. If they attended more than one high school, there is an option for filling that in. Of course, they want to know the most recent and where you'll be graduating from, but there are options rather for filling that information in. Any college related info. So this, for transfer students down the road, if they're applying to transfer, they need to note where they are attending, the grades they've received, their anticipated classes for the following semester, depending on when they're applying for. And obviously, if you've attended anything with dual enrollment during your time in high school. This is also where you're going to find honors, current classes, future plans. So that means when you're applying, as well as like, what are your goals? Do you want to get a bachelor's degree? Do you eventually want to go on to a master's? Is there a field you'd like to enter? And then self-reported test scores. You will enter the test scores here if you're choosing to submit scores, but it should be noted that you will also need to send them officially to the colleges. So to send them officially, that means you need to go through the college board and select the score report that you choose to send, or you might be super scoring. That's an option there as well. And making sure that the school accepts the super score, and you will be sending it directly to the colleges on your college list. And you can go school by school, you can go for all of them, really depends on your score and your plan. But for that, you do need to send it directly from the College Board or the ACT, and so that it arrives. I know it's silly because they send it electronically, but you do want to do it about 2 weeks at least before you hit submit, because your student will get a panicked email saying, we don't have your scores, and they very likely do, but it causes a lot of nerve-wracking situations if those scores are not in the student's file. That being said, they're also going to charge you every time you send a score. So make sure you really want to send it and make sure you're choosing the right schools on the list to send those officially. All right, I've got another question here. 1 second. Can a student list schools they're applying early action and schools they're applying regular decision at the same time? Absolutely. So for each school on the college section, so there's going to be specific college sections for each college you're applying to. And this is where they get to ask their own questions separate from the Common App questions. So really you want to think of it as there's the Common App and then all of the subsets from the particular schools. Once you're in a particular school, so let's say it's UMass Amherst and you're in there, you get to pick what your admission plan is. So you can say early action for them, Virginia Tech early action, I'm going to do GMU regular decision, and you can go through and select. Because when you hit submit, you're going to be hitting for one school at a time. And then I just mentioned self-reported test scores. So just again, make sure you're sending those officially. Same thing with the transcripts. I always advise that you want to be doing that at least a month before anything is due, and your school may have its own rules for that. The last high school I worked at, you needed to request the transcript at least 1 full month ahead of your first decision deadline. So typically speaking, kids would be scrambling around the 30th of September to get all of their requests in for November 1st. So those are things to keep in mind as well. Then as we get to the activities, we're going to see that you can really go up to 10 activities and enter in those details. So some students might have 18 activities and they have to whittle that down. Other students may have 5 that they really want to explain. I never say you have to put 10, but if you have 10 that would be lovely to share, that's wonderful. I don't want to ever see just 1 though. So you want to make sure like you're taking into consideration other things that would be considered activities. So if you mow your neighbor's lawn in your neighborhood every summer, that's an activity. If you babysit your sister, that's an activity. So no student should be walking in with just 1 on there, because you can include a variety of things like employment, if you were in a club throughout your time in high school, if you played a sport, all the things that we typically think of as activities, but you can go beyond that as well. So you want to at least have 3 things in there, and you can certainly go up to the 10, but you do have to stop there. And we will talk about that a lot more once we dive in. But then the next section you would find, and this is what most kids talk about, is the Common App personal essay. and then the section called additional information, which I mentioned earlier. So this is the section where they're going to be selecting the prompt that they're responding to and entering, copy and pasting their essay into the Common App. When you submit it, you're submitting that school by school, but at the same time, if you wanted to change it for whatever reason in between submissions, you would have to take that essay out and put the next one in. I do not recommend doing that. You should be writing the same essay for all of your applications. That's why the Common App prompts exist. But if for some reason you applied early decision somewhere and you desperately want to change something in your essay, that is an option for your future submission dates. But again, hopefully you're just submitting the one that you've been working on the hardest. And so students need to know going into this what their essay prompt they chose was. So there are 7 different prompts. Number 7 is topic of your choice. So if all else fails, it's topic of your choice. But many students know which one they're responding to. Some are trying to figure out, okay, which one does this fall under? So that is something that you want to make sure you're selecting correctly there. Even if it is topic of your choice, they want to know if you're following the prompt or not. And so if you're doing topic of your choice, totally fine. That's why they have it there, and you're going to tell a great story. But just make sure if you're picking one of the prompts, you're selecting the one that you are responding to. Oh, and I see another question here. Some schools request an added essay for nursing. Is that done via the Common App? 95% of the time. Some schools will ask you to submit it separately directly to the head of the nursing department or the head of admissions for their health sciences department, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to find it on the Common App itself. Once you select nursing as your major, it's going to pop up another option for adding additional essays, additional letters of recommendation. Sometimes if you choose test optional, for example, it's going to populate another box to write another essay, and that's school dependent, but certainly for the most part, you will find them on the Common App, but it will be noted otherwise if it's not submitted there. So once you select nursing, they'll either prompt you to send it elsewhere or to submit it there, or you'll almost immediately receive an email from the school asking you to submit it elsewhere. And then, like I said, if there are additional essays required beyond the Common App personal statement, this is also what you need to be prepared for. They won't be listed next to the Common App essay. They're going to be under writing for each school. So each school will have their own writing section. Sometimes it will say optional. I am a firm believer that it is never optional, unless it is a very specific thing, like if your parents are veterans, write an essay about blank. If it's optional, other than those very specific situations, you should be writing it. And then there is also an additional information section. This can be incredibly important for some students, but by no means do I suggest every student filling out additional information. It's not meant to be another essay. It's not meant to be that every child has some circumstance they need to explain, but some good examples I can suggest for this section would be, I've had students in the past who had a really terrible bout with mono while in school, and they missed a great deal of school. GPA dipped a little bit when they were sophomores. They explained it here. Parents moved a lot while they were in high school, so they have a disjointed transcript between schools, explaining it there. Circumstances in your personal life and in your family life, that's a great place to explain those things if it affected your trajectory in school. Any projects, achievements, or experiences that you did not feel as though you could put into the activities section. That is very individual to each student. There might be, I've had students, for example, describe their Eagle project from Boy Scouts in additional information because you can only put this much into it on the activities section. So again, I really, truly do not recommend that every student does it, but I think when you have some special circumstances, whether around your academic record or your ability or options for taking AP classes or your options for taking testing, anything that's happened and you feel that it would help admissions understand your situation better, certainly I recommend that. Working with a college coach on this can be really helpful to know what to put in there and what not to. Again, admissions reps want to read it if it's going to help shape their understanding of your overall profile. It's not another place to write a small essay that has nothing to do with a circumstance that affected you. So again, I always encourage students to check what they're putting in that section the same way that they would check their Common App essay or any supplements. All right. So those were all the components of the Common App itself. So pretty straightforward in the sense that it's broken into those manageable sections. The only times where we see some hiccups are certainly when we're doing parent education section. Sometimes students have some very particular questions about the marital status questions. And then also, should I choose early action? Should I not? Because you have to select the admissions plan you're following. Should I put undecided? Should I, choose business as a major? Am I better off trying to transfer into a certain major once I've applied? So those are all very particular to students and their own profiles. So while there's no one general rule for that, I do encourage students to work with a college coach, check in with their school counselor, touch base with their teachers with any questions related to, should I select this major? What does that mean for me? Is it going to give me higher chances, lower chances? Does undecided not look good? Different things. And that's going to vary school by school as well. So now that we go to the personal statement, this is where a student is going to write one essay for all the schools. You just pick one out of the 7 prompts. It can be 250 to 650 words. So they don't want you to write 2 sentences and be done, but they also don't want you to write a novel. And when I say that, if you hit 651, you cannot hit submit. So students have to be very tight on their word limit here. And some students struggle with that mightily because there's a lot they want to put into their essay and there's a lot of creativity there. Other students find that they're able to chop it down because it basically comes out to about 1.5 pages, almost 2 pages in terms of, standard writing. And some students just find that they have a lot of Xing out and chopping to do to get it under that word count. Again, working with somebody on this is extremely important because you need a second pair of eyes. One time, that you read it yourself and then you keep reading it, if you're reading it out loud to yourself, you're going to gloss over mistakes very easily because you're used to reading it. And that's why I say, have a college coach read it, but have your parents read it, have your sibling read it, like maybe they're already in school, have a friend read it and see what they think about it. I know this one can be particularly tough to do with your students as a parent. I say that myself as a live-in guidance counselor with my own children, that I don't think I read my daughter's college essay until 2 days before she submitted it because she wanted to do it herself. So there can be some, pushback about releasing the essay to your parents' eyes. So that's, dependent, but sometimes a third party can be really useful there. This I cannot stress enough. This is where your student can show their voice, their character, how they've grown over the years. This is not a place where we're going to, list our resume. This is not a cover letter. It's very different than that. You're not just regurgitating your activities. You're telling a story that's very important to who you are and what they should know about you. One thing I always suggest when we're thinking about the Common App essay is you should be able to predict what is, when the admissions rep gets to the end of the paper and they say, so what? They have an answer. What does this all mean? What does this tell me about Caitlin? What does this tell me about Natalia? What does this tell me about Roberto? We need to know why you wrote this for us. And that doesn't mean explicitly saying so. It's showing, not telling, of course. But they should see a point to it and how it connects to how you want them to perceive you. Of course, as with anything else, we do want to avoid some cliches. A lot of students in the past, I've seen over my career a lot of teamwork related essays, which as long as you put a really great spin on it and tell a really unique story, it can be fantastic. But if it's very, typical, straightforward, I learned about teamwork because we won the baseball championship, you got to make sure that you're changing it up a little bit. And you just want to avoid certain cliches that you commonly find in Common App essays, and certainly anything that doesn't sound like you. We want to make sure it sounds authentic. That's the biggest takeaway. In a world of now AI generated content, of course, the college essay component is becoming a hot topic because students can seemingly not have to write it themselves. A really good admissions rep is going to know and be able to tell. There's some clues that you can see. There's software that they use, just like Turnitin and other components, and those are only getting better as AI is getting better. But I do tell students, if you want to ask ChatGPT, hey, here's my, background. I'm struggling to come up with a topic. Can you ask me a couple questions to help me get to a topic? That's fine, but the students should be writing it themselves. I mean, I know it's silly to emphasize that because I'm sure you all feel similarly, but it's fine to brainstorm with ChatGPT if that helps your student get going. But I recommend brainstorming with a human being first, and then bringing some questions there to refine things, and then writing the essay yourself. And then at the end, if you want to spell check or you want to make sure there's no grammar issues, you can certainly go that route. But most of the writing programs we use do that anyway. All right. So I put a sample essay intro here from one of my favorites, and it's in a book of college essays that really worked. And I think this one has always stood out to me. And not that I need to read it to you, but you can see some of the imagery that's here, the chubby fingers outstretched and round cheeks flattened against the window. I leaned further into the plexiglass. Kind of a little funny thing. I possessed little concept of manners. So this individual is on the L in Chicago. And they're at that moment, all that matters, I was soaring above the streets of Chicago. This continues into an essay about taking the L every day and what you can see from there and perspective on the world. And, eyes darting across the ever-changing expanses of the city, I refuse to lift my gaze in fear of missing anything. The essay goes on from there, and if anyone's interested, feel free to email me at the end. I can send you the whole thing. But certainly, it's a very poignant essay of moving from this experience as a child and how it impacted him as he became a young adult, and looking at the world differently that way, and people's lives rushing past him. So this is a really unique one to think about. And I'll put in the chat my email address just in case anyone wants to see the whole thing, because it is great. So let me put that in there for you all. And I'll just put our consultation link too in case anyone needs it. But this is a really great example. There's tons of them out there that you can look at, but I've always had this one when we do workshops and things like that. This one stands out to me. But particularly for your child, let's start with some key tips here. So you want to start with a story. This can be a moment, a challenge. Like I said, we don't want to just repeat the things you've achieved in high school. And it can be related to one of those achievements, certainly, but you want to tell about a moment in time. And it could be several moments like that essay we just looked at, but in the same location, or it can be one moment in a single day where everything changed. So there's no limitation on what you can write about here, but you do want to make sure that you're showing some imagery or giving something truly authentic to your voice in this writing. A main component of this, even if you're not flat out saying, and this is how my hard work ethic really changed, they want to see growth and that your ability to reflect on the person that you are. This is how your student thinks. This is how they learn. What have they done from entering high school as a 14-year-old to now being 17 or 18 applying to college that has shaped them? Again, this is whenever you look at the Common App and you take the essay out, what is the one thing you wish the school would know about your child? And what's the one thing they wish they could express? That's one of the best ways to think about it. I've had students write about their participation in dance, for example. And her entire, Common App was very, very academically focused, extremely high achieving student, and dance was the essay, and it absolutely blossomed because it wasn't repeating anything that they already knew about her being a high achieving student. This is when she felt free, when she was dancing. So there's lots of things, but it doesn't have to be activity related either. I've had students write about their relationship with their grandmother. I've had another student write about being left-handed. I've had students talk about their thoughts in the shower. There's really no limit here of what you can explore. But there are some topics, that over the years as a counselor, I've talked students through about what you may want to share and what you don't. I love to believe that the world exists without biases, but we know it does. And so sometimes knowing what an admissions counselor might interpret something as versus what you think you're telling them would be important to keep in mind. So like everything else, but especially with the essay, this is where I suggest an expert. So if there's anything that you have qualms about sharing or anything that you'd like to share but need some help framing it, this is where that can be really helpful. Also, like you want to use really concrete examples, names, projects, outcomes. I know it even says numbers there, but like there can be something very specific related to that. If you're writing your essay about your best friend, and maybe you don't want to use her name, but you can put that in there, whatever it might be, you want to be specific, even though they're not going to be able to find out who that person is. They're just going to be able to see what you show them. And then also, supplemental essays should be tailored for each school. The Common App essay absolutely should not be. Again, that's going to be one essay you write for all of them. But for each school, they will have some supplemental essays. There are some that do not, where you want to reflect the school's values, all the research you've done into the school. Is there a particular class you want to take? Is there some research you'd like to conduct? That's important to keep in mind also. And then if there's something about the school's culture, that's another thing that students, even though it's usually a very short essay, that's something that they would want to include, to say, I really love that this particular school is invested in sustainability, and explain that, because they want to know that you've gone beyond the front page of the website and that they're ranked, 16th in psychology programs or whatever it might be. So that's something that you should think about in terms of the supplements and the why do you want to attend blank university questions. Here are some simple do's and don'ts, and feel free to screenshot if that's helpful here. Again, I'll be sending you all the recording. But over the years, I've collected the do's and don'ts that I wanted to share with students, and I add on after time and as essays change. But as I mentioned, the number one thing you want to do is show growth or reflection. They just want to see that you've grown as an individual and as a student and as a human being who's going to be potentially living on their campus, making friends on their campus, being in their classes, contributing to the community. Those are really important aspects of why colleges will say yes to a student. So they want to see that they'll be there, contribute, and come back every year. Do use your own writing voice and tone. Fortunately, when I was a school counselor and I knew my students really well, I could tell when they weren't writing like themselves or had somebody write it. Obviously, our college coaches get to know students, but you want to make sure that the writing voice is true to who you are. Again, this is not going to be the most academic essay, so it doesn't have to sound like your scholarly voice. Of course, we want proper grammar. We want the right punctuation, unless you're taking a very creative route and doing a little Faulkner there and omitting commas and things like that. And it's very clear that you're doing something like that. You do want to be a good writer, but in your own voice. You're not writing a research paper. Do seek feedback and a proofreader. It it shouldn't stick out, but sometimes it does when you see a little typo in an essay, or if you see something that just the sentence got jumbled or something happened that made it more incoherent. It sticks out, and sometimes it can show carelessness, and that's not one of the things you want to show a college admissions rep. Do, as I mentioned before, focus on a moment or two. This can be, as I mentioned, academically related, personal, family, global. There are no limitations. It doesn't have to be related to what you're going to major in. It doesn't have to be related to the sport that you play. It doesn't have to be related to the school in that sense, but it has to be who you are. And do really have fun with the essay. I can't stress this enough. This is, you want to fit at the school as much as they want someone who fits there. You want to end up someplace, and I'm saying you, your students want to end up someplace where they could be happy and where they see themselves. So have fun with the essay and make sure you're answering so what at the end, what their takeaway is. Don't write about what you want to do when you grow up. There are ways to write about that without doing that explicitly, but I have read essays in the past where it's like, I'm applying to engineering programs because at some point I want to be a mechanical engineer, and then I want to do this, and then I want to do this. That doesn't show them anything about who you were leading up to this, the growth you've experienced, and who you are today. There might be a story you want to tell about using Legos to build something when you were younger and then connect it through further. I've had some students certainly write about their future goals in the sense that they're tying it into research they've done on their own. But again, you want to move away from explicit, like I want to be a dental hygienist, to more so about wanting to help people. So making that connection. Don't mention the name of a particular college or university in the essay unless it is for that college only. So that should be really clear, but sometimes students put it into their Common App by accident, or they meant to only submit it once to just that school, but it doesn't look good to just that school either because they know you're supposed to be submitting it to everyone. So again, proofread, proofread, proofread. Make sure you're not putting anything in there that you wouldn't want them to read. Already said this, don't reiterate your resume. This one I said, don't give too much information on sensitive topics without checking with somebody. I just think it's helpful to know if you're sharing about a really challenging and personal time in your student's life. There's some ways to talk about it that might be a little bit easier for a stranger who's reading it to be more understanding. Don't write an essay you'd write to school, and don't give it a title. I've had too many students want to submit it with a title over time. No need for one. You're selecting which prompt you're responding to. So if you have any questions about the essay in this regard, please feel free to pop them into the chat. I know it's a lot. We do webinars completely on the essay as well, but I did want to share these do's and don'ts as you either review ones being submitted on November 1st or November 15th, or as you plan ahead for regular decision or your child's future admission cycles. Then there are supplemental essays. Not every school has them, but many do require extra essays. It could be as simple as 150 words, or it can be another 500-word essay that they want. It's important to tailor those responses to each school's prompt. Yes, there's chances to rinse and reuse to an extent, but you want to be tweaking those and tailoring those appropriately. Because if you have two schools that ask you what your definition of success is, you can certainly use that interchangeably, but you want to pay attention to it and see if there's something about that school that would resonate more than what you wrote for the other one. And you do want to highlight why you fit for that school specifically. There's a lot of schools we can give examples for regarding this, and I have some coming up that you'll see. But that's where you want to read the school's mission statement. You want to look at their social media. You want to get a sense of how students who are there interact with the school and what their sense is of the campus and the culture, and reflect that into that particular why do you want to attend this college type of essay. So for example, a big one out there is that Virginia Tech has 4 separate required essays. These are very particular to Virginia Tech, and they are very important to their admissions readers. So number 1 is about their motto. And I had to cut these down a little bit because they're very long, but I wanted to get it all on one slide for you. And they want you to show how you contribute to a community that is important to you. That I may serve is very important to Virginia Tech. The feeling of Virginia Tech being home is very important to them. And they want in that essay to find out how you would contribute to their campus by telling a story about how you've contributed elsewhere. So that's something important to share. They also talk about their principles of community, access and inclusion, and making sure everyone is affirmed in their dignity and value. How have you had an experience when you or someone you know were not being included? So again, there's a huge sense of community there. They want to know what happened when you felt not included, or when you felt like you were discriminated against, or have you had someone you know have that happen to them? These are shorter essays, but they all are required. So you're going to have to try to tell the right story in a very small amount of words, 250 words. Share a time when you were most proud of yourself, either as a role model or when you displayed leadership. That can be leading your little brother. That can be being the captain of a team. That can be, any number of situations where you had to help out your group of friends. Any kind of leadership is appropriate there. I will say students in the past have struggled with the last one. Describe a goal that you have set and the steps you will take to achieve this goal, because it's not one that's over yet. So they talk about in the rest of the essay prompt, like, who would you go to for help? How would you write up a timeline for this? How would you structure this? How would you achieve it? So this one always requires a little bit of brainstorming and some additional thinking and plotting out a goal that you already have, or setting a goal for yourself, because they want to see how you think through the steps of that. So this is very important to keep in mind for Virginia Tech. I don't see them changing them, at least in the next couple of years. And I don't see them taking out the "that I may serve" question. So these are important to keep in mind. And certainly if you wanted to work with a college coach who has gotten students into Virginia Tech, that would be very helpful. Make sure no other questions here. Here's another one, University of Maryland College Park. They have these little short fill-in ones. So you're going to see some unique ones. UVA used to have something like this, for example. If I could travel anywhere, I would go blank. And it's a character limit, not a word limit on this one. The most interesting fact I ever learned from research was X. And so you want to go a little bit outside the box there. You want to think about something that you've done on your own in terms of a topic you find fascinating and you learned something really cool from that research. You want to make sure it's not, again, this is where we're avoiding cliches. We're avoiding something that might be entirely too common unless you can explain it a little bit differently. In addition to my major, my academic interests include, so we have a lot of students who want to major in, for example, engineering, but want to minor in game design, or they want to minor in art or something along those lines. Talk about that other thing you're very interested in. Or if you happen to be a history buff, but you have no intention of studying history, that can be another thing you mention here. It can be that you study other cultures. It can be that you're trying to learn a language on your own. And you'll see other questions like this from other schools. My favorite thing about last Wednesday was, I love that question on there. And something you might not know about me is, what would you tell them? What would you want them to know? And that it would be a unique thing. Because at the end of the day, it's a human being who's sitting there in their office reading these. It might be 4:25 and they're about to leave. It might be 8:01 and they're still groggy. You want to have something stick out to them, so that they go and tell somebody else, hey, I read this really cool essay today, or this kid said something really funny in this particular response. I added the University of Richmond here as well, just so you can see that there are other ones out there. The Virginia Tech ones get quite a bit of attention. But for example, you have a platform to create change. What action or policy might you propose to address this issue, both at a school or on a national scale? Tell us about a time you learned something unexpected. What did you learn and what happened next? I like this one because it's moving away from the typical questions we get about, talk about a time where you faced an obstacle or made a mistake and what you learned from it. This is about learning something unexpected. And then Richmond welcomes students from various backgrounds, perspectives, and lived experiences. What is at least one way you will contribute to our community that's not already mentioned in your application? So they're being very explicit there. They're like, what are you going to do here that's not in there? This could be for somebody that they tend to be kind of that like counselor in their friend group, and maybe they're not going there to major in psychology, but they can mention how they try to get people together, how they try to solve problems. Or there can be other elements there that you find that you're constantly doing things to help your own community, but you're not going into community activism. There's lots you can mention there. Some things here, just where you find these questions, custom questions or writing on the Common App. Like I said before, occasionally they're optional. I don't think they are. And the typical length is 100 to 400 words. Some quick do's and don'ts here for these as well. You do want to do very thorough research on the school. They can tell, like, there's certain things about certain schools. They know that you can know the surfacey stuff. Dig in and see if there's something, that's really cool to you personally. Have your student look for that. Go through the website, look at the student activities section and see what might be there. Look at the study abroad page, look at the internship page, see what they do for students who are interested in, maybe doing a 6 and 5 program and getting their MBA. You want to look at the course catalog. It's always stuck out in my mind when a student's written about a really cool elective class that they want to take that's maybe a 500 level that they're going to take when they're a senior, but they're already thinking about it. Do mention at least 2 or 3 reasons why you're applying to that school. So that can be, and this is hard because sometimes they're very short, something specific about the major of interest. So if everybody who does poli-sci is required to have an internship in Washington, D.C., then you want to mention that if that's of interest to you. A specific research program, anything that might be important to you. Not just that you want to study abroad in Italy. You got to go beyond that, right? Because every school offers study abroad in Italy. You want to take it a little bit further. If you want to mention an experience you had from the college tour, you can also mention that and why it really made you say, oh my God, I can see myself here. At the end of the day, the Why Us essay is about you. It's about your student. As much as it's about the school, they're really trying to learn who your student is as they try to show why they want to attend there. Don't just say you think the campus is pretty or the weather is nice. I've seen those a lot. Yes, the weather is nice in many states. Campuses are pretty because they have landscapers. They know this. Don't mention that. If there's something culturally very cool that's on campus and you want to mention that specifically, but it just being a pretty place that you like the weather is not appropriate. Don't write that you have a friend attending there who said you would like it there too. You can mention that you've heard experiences, but you want to make sure that you're being very clear that there's things about this school that you really love. Don't explain that you heard their psychology major is good or that the school is ranked 12th. They know, they have a marketing department. So remember that this is about you, this is about your student. And as much as they're saying, why do you want to attend there? They're learning more about you and your response. They already know why they're great. Thankfully, we live in the United States and all of our colleges are very good, so they know why they're great. Fill in how you would be there. All right, getting into the activities and recommendations. This is where we want to really make sure we're putting meaningful activities, not just listing everything you've ever done. For the most part, this means just things in high school. But that being said, there are exceptions to that rule. Like, yes, you don't want to list that you were in the Amnesty International Club just in 7th grade and that's it. But if you're a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout and you've done it since you were a little kid through now, you can mention that as long as it's continuous. If you've done gymnastics since you were a little kid through now, dance through now, if you've been frequently learning, another language in an outside program, and it started in 7th grade, that's fine to mention, but nothing that's just singular from middle school or earlier. You do want to use action verbs and quantify the impact if it's possible. So if you engaged a certain number of students in a really cool activity on campus, if you created a club and then it went from 2 members to 150 before you graduated, anything like that. And then again, you want to prioritize quality over quantity. They want to see why you did these activities. They want to connect it to your overall profile and not just see that maybe you joined a bunch of clubs junior year and put them on there. They want to see some meaningful activities. So we want to showcase passions and commitment. So things that lasted a little bit. Even if you joined it sophomore year, but you're going to finish it out this year as a senior, that's perfectly appropriate to do. They just want to see commitment that you didn't, start something and not finish it. That being said, if you only did soccer for 2 years, but you loved it, you can put that on there. It's just being careful about showing too much one and done with different activities. Tie it to your essay theme if it's possible. So if your essay is about helping people, you should have a lot of community service on your activities list. You should absolutely include that you are balancing a part-time job while managing high school responsibilities, and volunteer things like that. If you help with your youth group at your church, this is a perfect place for that. If you do athletics outside of the high school, you want to mention that. There's a lot of club sports today. If you want to mention that there as well. The arts, if you took specific art classes over the summer, this is a great place to put it. So just make sure that you're showcasing commitment and passion and not just activities for the sake of activities. So I put an example here of student council, and this is exactly how it's laid out on the Common App and how much space you have, and that you need to be very succinct in everything that you're showing. So position or leadership, class president. For example, if this were about basketball and you're not the captain, this doesn't mean you have to put that you were a forward. You can just put team member. And then organization name, MHS student government. If it's something very unique, don't put abbreviations unless you're absolutely certain that the college knows what it is. Obviously, in this case, they know that you attended Meridian High School, or they know you attended Milford High School from earlier. But if there's an acronym in there that's for something else, just make sure that you're putting it clearly in the organization name so they know. Because there's some really cool groups at some high schools that a college admissions rep has never heard of. And then using those action words, led school initiatives, organized events for 300 plus students, and increased community engagement by 40%. That's a great way of putting it. It shows them that you're thinking like a future resume as well, but also you don't have to go into details about what kind of events. They know that when you're in student government, you do that. So it shows that leadership and measurable impact, highlights the scope of it. So we know that it's helped 300 plus students. And then we know that we're using action verbs here. You weren't passive in your commitment to this group. And of course, it meets the character requirements, which are very tiny. Now I put a more random, vague one for a science research project. So you can put that you're the project leader. You can put that you're assisting, your assistant on it, whatever it might be. And then designed experiments on renewable energy, mentored 5 peers, and presented findings at the regional science fair. For other activities might be like presented findings to the head of the history department, or something else might be raised funds for underprivileged children and, presented it at a ceremony at the end of the year. Whatever you can fit in, just so that it's very clear the impact you made and your ability to collaborate. And so colleges care a lot about research and leadership and your ability to do public speaking. This shows it very well. And again, we did not exceed the character requirement. They will certainly tell you won't be able to keep typing. So these are just 2 examples. Sometimes with students, I've had to work through some very unique activities about how we can fit it in there to explain what it was. That might be something that if you can't fit it here, but it's incredibly important to put back in that additional information we talked about earlier. And then there's also a responsibilities section now on the Common App, which I've been hoping for years, and I'm so glad it's there now, for students to be able to select if you're spending 4 or more hours a week assisting family or household members. So for example, if you have an elderly parent living in the home and they're helping out with that, this is important for colleges to know that you're balancing family responsibilities on top of school, on top of a job, on top of activities. And it also gives some context for what your daily life is like. So they mentioned farm work. If your child is the prime interpreter for the family, if you're managing the family finances, providing transportation for your little brother every day after school, taking care of a sick member of the family. And it's like 4 or more hours per week on a consistent basis, working a paid job to contribute to the family's household. Then there's some other circumstances they would want students to select if they have to commute 60 minutes or more to and from school each day. At one point in my career, I worked at an out-of-district placement, and many students spent an hour and a half on a bus every day to get there, and then an hour and a half home. And that really impacts your school day and your health and exhaustion. If they're experiencing homelessness, living without consistent heat, power, and food, unreliable internet, living independently, and then you can select none of these, of course. But this is important if it is a factor in the child's life. And then for recommendations, if you're a senior, you should have already done this, and I imagine you have, but you want to choose teachers and mentors who know you very well. So if it's a senior year teacher, just make sure that there's somebody they also interacted with you before this year. Maybe they led a club you were in, they're the coach of a team, you had some other interaction with them. But usually a junior year teacher is a really good choice. And typically speaking, they want you to ask them last June, but sometimes at the beginning of this school year. You want to make sure you're giving them context. They may know you and they may be one of your favorite teachers, but they don't remember that you play soccer, lacrosse, and you also are on a club team and you have a job and you all these other things. Give them some context so they can weave it into the recommendation. And then you want to make sure you're following up politely and early. And I always tell every student I've ever worked with, don't email to ask for the recommendation unless it's over the summer. Ask them in person. It's a very personal thing, and they have to write a lot of letters. So I do strongly suggest asking in person. All right, and some common app mistakes. Repeating resume info in the essays. Said this a million times. So you just want to show your voice, not your achievements. Vague or generic storytelling. We want to move away from this. They want examples. Just like when you're writing a paper where you have to give examples to back up your claims, this is not a research paper, but you do want to give examples so they know what you're talking about and that it's not a vague representation of your life. Don't wait until the last minute. When students do that, then they find 6 other things that they forgot they had to do on the Common App. So sometimes first, you've got the last minute essay that you have to write very quickly, or you have the last minute supplement that you didn't know was there until you clicked a certain button because then it populated that essay because you picked the nursing program. So you don't want to wait until the last minute. You want to go through the entire Common App weeks and weeks before you ever hit submit to make sure you have enough time in front of you to write additional essays or to polish everything in there. They know when it's very evident when it looks very rushed. And don't ignore the supplemental essays. You want to show fit and interest. I really do think, as I mentioned 1,000 times tonight, that they're not meant to be optional. You're making a choice by not submitting it, and that really affects it. I also want to stress the proper spelling and grammar. Of course, our computers catch a lot, but they don't catch certain things on the Common App. You want to capitalize all proper nouns. This is not a text message. I say this to all my students, that as you're filling out even just your street address, if you're putting 138 Wilson Avenue, that W should be capitalized. And so you want to make sure you're doing that. If you're putting in your father's name and it's Frederick, you're capitalizing that F. Nothing is written like you're texting a friend. You want to make sure you're using appropriate punctuation where needed. That would mostly be in the essay. You want to mind all grammar rules and check spelling just a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't catch everything and just you want to make sure, or you spelled it right, but it's the wrong meaning of the word. So make sure you're doing that. All right, and I know we're just about, we are over. So I just wanted to give you guys some timelines here for early brainstorming and drafting. Obviously, if your child is a senior right now, you're in the fall spot of this. We're looking ahead to next year, definitely summer you want to be writing so that it's not stressful for the fall. Start with that list of activities, start to think about which ones are the 10 most important, and identify those essay themes. Some English teachers will do the college essay as part of class, either for their juniors or for their seniors. Sometimes for seniors, that's a little too late though. And sometimes, almost every time I've had a student do that, they end up changing their topic as well. Do draft review cycles. And so these are your mentors, your counselors, your college coaches, your parents, you guys in the audience, to review drafts multiple times, just to refine that voice and make sure that it sounds really authentic and to catch all of those grammar things we mentioned. If you're doing some early action or early decision deadlines, you want to make sure everything reflects the student's unique perspective. Those are the ones you're going to submit the earliest, and you're an old pro at it after that, but this is the one that you're going to look at and pay the most attention to. Then it's going to be really important to track progress because one, you want to track everything you're doing leading up to submitting, like finishing the essays, finishing supplements, writing out your activities. But then you also want to make sure after you submit that your student is checking their email frequently and then creating their admissions account. Most schools have an account where the student can log in after they submit to check the status of their transcript, to check the status of their financial aid documents, to see if their test scores arrive. My whole career, I've spent chasing students to sign up for that, because then colleges are suddenly calling them saying, we don't have your transcript. And then it becomes a nerve-wracking situation. And a lot of colleges, that's how they tell you got in now as well. So there's going to be alerts on there. There's going to be requests for more information. So please, please, please make sure you're helping them log into that and checking it frequently. One last thing to know, colleges are allowed to make changes to their own questions, not the separate Common App questions. That stays with the Common App. They announce every year when they're all set. But colleges up until August 1st each year can change their supplemental essays. They can change their short response questions. They can change, anything they want on their section of the Common App. So it's important to keep that in mind, because you might end up writing an essay that they take off. So, you can try to confirm with them and call if you're going to write and say, hey, is this one going to stick around? And hopefully they'll let you know. But I've had a lot of students do that, where they were getting ahead and then unfortunately ended up writing an essay that was taken off that particular college's Common App section. So just something to keep in mind. And then certainly a college coach can help with determining fit. You want to make sure you have a very balanced college list between reach, target, and safety schools. Essay guidance, I can't stress it enough. It's a segmented time once a week or twice a week where the student is only focused on that, instead of the 2 hours of homework, the practice, getting into work, all of these things. It's just one set time, and it's not a fight with mom and dad either. Then certainly managing those deadlines and workflow. You want to stay on track of all of these moving pieces. Too often, students are working on 6 essays at once. You want to finish one, move on to the next. And then frankly, it just reduces all the stress and anxiety associated with all of this. It's an expert who can help you dot those I's, cross those T's, and reassure you that you've done everything correctly. All right, that was a lot of information. I'm sorry I went a little bit over there, but I'm certainly happy to take a couple questions if anyone has them. But I will be sending you all the link to the recording here, and then I'll also be giving you each a promo for 2 hours free with the purchase of a package, because you were kind enough to join me tonight. So I'll send that along as well, and that can be for college coaching or test prep or any academic subject. So if anyone wants to pop a question in, feel free. I'll stick around for a couple minutes. But otherwise, for those of you that have to take off, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate your attendance, and I'm here if you have any questions whatsoever. My email address is in the chat, and I hope that I can be here to be helpful to you. Yep, okay, I don't think any more questions are in there. I thought I saw one pop up, but other than that, I hope to be a resource to you in the future. Feel free to book a free consultation with me at any time, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.